I took this semester off to travel to India and do some other things, and it feels great to be at a podium again and working this thing. I love it. Oh, I am thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. I love sharing the narratives of Mormon women in India, in Mormon members in India. And I wanted to highlight one thing that has really stood out for me in my research. I am writing my dissertation on the church in India, as we said, and one of my chapters will be on women specifically and on what I'm hearing from women there. So this is kind of a chapter being thrown at your face in 20 minutes. But I have interviewed well over 150 people in India, these oral history interviews, and spent 2 different months in India just trying to be part of the stake. The first stake in the church on the subcontinent was organized in Hyderabad in 2012. So the church is very young, and it's an opportunity to see the growth of the church from the ground up. This is a woman who I met on my last trip just a few weeks ago in October. This is Bharti Sumarajan, and she is the instructor for the self-reliance class that I actually happen to sit in on, which is a huge thing going on in the third world right now, in the global south of the church. And Bharti, I sat in this class and was amazed. I was blown away by the capability of her teaching and the students that were being taught. This was in the building at the same time. There was a business class going on. There was another entrepreneurial class, and then there was this class on education. And you see this woman writing on the board. As these women came into class, they would write on the board if they had spoken to 5 people about their education. If they had, there were certain things that they checked off and reported to one another in this class. Through this class, they can access PEF funds, perpetual education funds. And it was just inspiring. But afterwards, I interviewed Bharti, and she told me that she wanted to be a doctor. She grew up in northern India, and her father just happened to be from this podunk town outside of Hyderabad, right? So he retires from the military, and she has to go back to Hyderabad and go back to the roots, right? She couldn't pass the medical exam there because it was a completely different syllabus than she was used to, and so she didn't become a doctor, but she did find the LDS missionaries who came to their store one day. And I do cartwheels in my head, my cheerleader self, when I just hear the narratives of these women and how they are doing in India, and the sorrows and the struggles that they have as well. Bharti's story, however, starts with these missionaries come to the store, start to teach the family. They finally convince her that she needs to come to church. And so she comes to the first meeting that she's ever been to, small home group in a house. Okay, it wasn't even a branch yet, just a home group. And she noticed that people were going up, it happened to be testimony meeting and giving testimonies. And she told her brother, I want to go up and tell how I feel about Christ. And that was the very first time that I went to church, and I stood up and I bore my testimony of the goodness of Christ and how I loved the message of the missionaries. That was only the beginning. And I hear this a lot. There's this, I interviewed a woman who's an investigator, a Hindu investigator, and she was thrilled. She couldn't thank me enough for giving her an opportunity to speak and to define her spiritual yearnings and thoughts. Satyavani Bodhu is another woman that I interviewed on my first trip in 2014. She said that in other churches, only one person has to teach and talk about the gospel. Only one person has the knowledge, and all people will listen. But here, individually, each one is getting to talk about Jesus Christ, because as they are talking, they are developing their testimonies. So this is, I think, a huge draw for both women and men in the church. One of my favorite quotes, and I get a lot of this from Deidre Green. I have to credit her for this. This is a great paper she wrote. This is from Mary Daly, who said, "To exist humanly is to name the self, the world, and God." And I think that's what happens when I put a microphone in front of a woman. It gives her an opportunity to name herself, the world, and God. She is the authority, and there is a tangible feeling that comes with having that authority. Ideally, I don't have to be there, right? Get the white girl out of the scene. But for now, it's a start, I think. This is from Deidre's paper that I'm pillaging from. She said, in order for speech to actualize its full creative potential, it must be heard. The extent to which narrative is redemptive is contingent not only on the speaker, but on the audience, those who receive the word. The community must be willing to hear women's self-definitions. I like that. A book that I just reviewed for the Journal of Mormon History was this one written. This is a narrative, 10 women's narratives in the RLDS Church. I recommend this highly for the introductory reading in this that was written by Danny Jorgensen. It gives a great insight into how to read what he calls her stories. You know, obviously we know what he's doing there. But he said, in reading her stories, oh, by the way, if you read, it's so fun to connect with like distant cousins of the Restoration, right? It's like they talk about their patriarchal blessings and their encounters with the three Nephites. And it's just like, whoa, mind blowing. Anyway, he said, Danny Jorgensen said, in reading her stories, I have been astounded again and again at the many ways in which women have been required to negotiate constantly and creatively with men to achieve an existentially meaningful existence for themselves and for others. And I see this. And as I listen to these narratives and go over them and mine them, I'm seeing how women are doing this. One of my favorite ways that I've noticed is the handbook, and I'll get to that in just a minute. But to start with, I want to get to one thing that's standing out. Every woman that I interview, I ask, so tell me about women in India, tell me about women in the church. And try not to lead too much. And I will often get the word patriarchy, and it is never used in a positive light. It is always pejorative. It is always something that we are trying to get rid of, that we are trying to resist. The story of the Hyderabad branch begins in 1978. This is, well, actually it begins in Samoa, by the way, with Edwin Dharmaraju, who joins the church there, who is a native of Hyderabad, who actually gets permission from Spencer W. Kimball to go with his wife and teach his family. 22 members are baptized, and they are the original branch in Hyderabad. And basically, I interviewed this little guy right here. He was a big guy in the mission presidency at the time. And he said, frankly, my uncle was the patriarch of the family. And he said, this is the true church, and you need to join it. And so we did. And so I find it interesting that the beginnings of the church are patriarchy in India. This is a quote from the wife of the man that I was just mentioning. She says, I think it's very patriarchal here, Men dominate a lot. My mother's generation, I see most of them struggled. The men decide what has to be done for the family. But of course there are certain women who are strong-willed and men who are weak. But mostly it's a very patriarchal society in India. It differs from person to person. If that man is a good man, respectful man, then the woman who married him is a happy woman, a lucky woman. But if you're in the wrong place, wrong person, I've seen my cousins and they have been dominated, hit. One, my uncle used to smoke and put his cigarette butt on my aunt. They say Indian women get abused, but in other countries too, it's the same. Women are being abused everywhere. She continues, I think in the church, I think the brethren have slowly understood the priesthood holders that all of us are equal. She said, of course they have priesthood, and it's interesting to watch her working this out, right, as she's talking. Of course they have priesthood, so we have motherhood, and they have different roles, and we have different roles, and priesthood presides, and sometimes the mother, like for me, my husband is not there most of the time. World-renowned heart surgeon, and in the mission president, never home, right? And so she's saying most of the time, so I have to take most of the decisions to take care of the family and do family prayer and family home evening. And sometimes I have to preside over the family. And I think the sisters have gained a lot of confidence. I just love watching what's going on in these narratives. Anna Purna said that personally for me, if it was not for the church, I wouldn't be sitting here like this, sitting here and talking to you. She says that I would have just told you a few words and that's it. But it has changed me. It has changed my way of thinking about myself, about that I am not low. I'm equal to men. But that doesn't mean like women's organization fighting around. Okay. So again, there's this feeling of patriarchy is bad. It's something we're fighting against. And there's something else going on in the church. Men are presiding, they have priesthood, but it's good. And I'm seeing improvement. And I'm improving, and I'm speaking, and I'm powerful. I have power. So these are kind of things that I'm observing. Annapurna Guti, how much time do I have? Do you have like a shut up timer? 7 minutes. Okay, awesome. Okay, so Annapurna is one of my faves. She self-identifies as a Brahmin woman. So she says, like, we're the highest on the caste, tower. And she says that sometimes the church here still goes on the patriarchal order. And it's been there in our society for a long time. So the head decides what everyone else does. So that patriarchal order sometimes sets in, and breaking that is very, very necessary. So in the branch council meetings, we take out the handbook, okay? So, and I hear this a lot. I hear this concept of council as opposed to patriarchy. Those are oppositional definitions, as well as claiming a liberation through the handbook. She was called as the district president. She told me, when I was called as district president, the district president told me, all you have to do is speak at the meeting. That's all you have to do. And she said, I knew there was more to the job than that. So I looked in the handbook, and sure enough, there was. And when she wasn't able to administer the way she needed to and the way the handbook said, she said she'd go to the mission president. She'd go over his head. So anyway, I see an interesting thing going on there. Again, women navigating for existential importance in their lives. This is a male quote here. And I hear this, there's rhetoric, there's narrative, there's words going on of how to be a priesthood holder or perhaps a patriarch, but I don't hear that word ever. He says, but I am grateful for this gospel because it tells that they are both the same, women and men. Not one is superior or inferior. Both are equal, and men, without her, you can't get exalted. That is one of the greatest truths because you break all the traditions and cultures in India. So there's something in the message of the gospel that is working counter to the patriarchy that they are naming. Before I go there, I just want to say, I thought, okay, got to look up how we're using patriarchy here a little bit, right? So I go to my general conference corpus, look at how we're using the word patriarchy. How many times do you think it was used in conference? Any guesses? Okay. No existing uses of the word patriarchy. Whatever's going on in the church, we're not calling it patriarchy. We're not calling it patriarchy at all, okay? Patriarch is there, okay? In the 19th century, we get the use of patriarch as Hiram Smith, people who are ordained as patriarchs. The patriarch, it's not the patriarch of a family, okay? It's not until 1950s that we start seeing that usage, and it spikes in 1980. And I just wanted to give a couple of uses that have come in the last decade. This is Elder Bednar in his talk, The Powers of Heaven. Note the talk title, okay? Definite reference to section 131, where we talk about the powers of heaven are inseparably connected with principles of righteousness, right? And they cannot be used or abused, right? So he says, at the conclusion of temple recommend interviews I conducted as a bishop and stake president, I often would ask the married sisters how I could best serve them and their families. The constancy of the answers I received from those faithful women was both instructive and alarming. The sisters rarely complained or criticized, but they often responded as follows. Please help my husband understand his responsibility as a priesthood leader in our home. I am happy to take the lead in scripture study, family prayer, and family home evening, and I will continue to do so. But I wish my husband would be an equal partner and provide the strong priesthood leadership only he can give. Please help my husband learn how to become a patriarch and a priesthood leader in our home who presides and protects. Okay. Another use is from Elaine Dalton's talk, Love Her Mother. I don't know if you remember this one. This is talking about how do you raise a young teenage girl in this world? And the answer was you love her mother, right? Really interesting, fantastic talk. Today's popular culture tries to erode and demean your eternal role as a patriarch and a father and minimize your most important responsibilities. These have been given to you by divine design, and as fathers, you are to preside over your families in love and righteousness and are responsible to provide the necessities of life and protection for your families. These resonate with me because this is what I hear coming back at me from both men and women in terms of what a male priesthood presiding person does. This is what it looks like. And it is different than a patriarchy. Patriarchy is evil. It is real. It is in their face. And it's something that the church helps them to overcome. And I see that very clearly in the narratives. Now, it is not perfect there. And in fact, one of my interviews in Goa this last time, the woman and the man I was interviewing together, and which is sometimes interesting to watch the dynamic, I think, between the two. And she was expressing to me his anger and the way he expresses his anger sometimes. And it was as if she was calling out to me to help because what she was married to wasn't matching the ideal. And there he was. And it was fascinating, to say the least. But we are dealing with issues of patriarchy the world over. And I think it's important for us as Latter-day Saints to look at how we use those words and how we represent and why we use those words and what we're doing there. This is the Hyderabad Stake Presidency, just to give you a glimpse. The man on the far right, in his story, he talks about how people used to not be willing to touch him. So he definitely comes from that lower caste. But he and his wife have opened a school. She's the headmistress of a school that now has 600 students in a partially slum area, and doing amazing things. President Guti in the center, his wife is a doctor, and he is one of the pioneers of the church. He joined the church very shortly after the branch was organized in Hyderabad. And then President Natarajan and his wife are fantastic. She's a professor as well. So you have an interesting group of women. I was interested to ask Sudha about her reaction to her husband being called as the stake president. And I expected to hear her say, because she's a physician and she's got children and, you know, this is a new stake. I was expecting her to say, wow, it's really rough. But she said, I said, is it tough? And she said, no, absolutely not. No sacrifice at all. I am so privileged. Me and my husband love to serve, and we have a love for that calling. And I'm grateful for that calling. And whatever he does, I think that is a blessing for our family. And I think the blessings that we are enjoying is only from that calling. We know that very well, and I don't think we sacrificed anything. And this was a woman who told it like it is, and I don't think she was sugarcoating for me. I have tremendous confidence. These are some BYU students. If you see them on campus, high five them. A lot of them are returned missionaries. Love this picture of the saris and the kurtas and the salwar kameez with the name badges. Just so fun. But I have great hope for women and for the future of the church and in how we deal with issues of gender as I look and listen to women and men in the church in India. The end.